welcome everybody to our last distinguished seminar for this semester. I have the pleasure to introduce Emilia Gómez. She will talk about the scientific challenges in artificial intelligence from a European point of view. Emilia works at the European Commission Joint Research Center in Seville, Spain, and she will talk about her work on the HUMAINT project, basically the impact of artificial intelligence in human behavior, including the AI Act, which is maybe the main proposed regulation of the use of AI in the current days. So, Emilia, thanks for coming. Please share your screen.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm very happy to give this talk, and I think I will share my screen. I guess you can see it, right? So, yes. So thanks a lot for this opportunity. As Ricardo mentioned, and I work at the European Commission, so I will explain a little bit what is my work about, and I wanted to reflect a bit on this idea of science for policy, because it's the work I do, which are the challenges that we have in the scientific research, but also in the policy side in terms of artificial intelligence. Of course, I'm bringing more the European perspective because I work at the Commission, so I'm working more in this perspective. So I wanted to just give you a brief intro about myself and also about the work that we do at my institution. The second thing I wanted to give you is a little bit the policy context where we are working on and why we need to develop this or this concept of trustworthy AI and that related initiative that is the AI Act. And then I wanted to explain you a little bit some of the projects that my team is doing in this context. So about myself, I have an interdisciplinary background. I'm mostly a computer scientist, I'm an engineer, but I also have a musical background. So I did a lot of research on music recommender system and information retrieval, and a lot of work on machine learning for audio mostly. And then later on, I was becoming more and more interested on the impact of algorithmic systems on people. And then I started and lead this HUMAINT project where I collaborate with an interdisciplinary team of researchers that I have the chance to lead. And they come from cognitive science, also economics and social sciences, and also engineering, to understand the impact of algorithms and on people in different ways. This now currently this project is carried out in the context of the Joint Research Center. This is an in-house service of the Commission, so it's a research center which is inside is part of the Commission. Maybe we can have the NIST as a US similar model, and is spread in 6 different countries. So for instance, I'm based in Spain, but my team is spread over Brussels and Italy, for instance, this AI team. And we are also working a lot with other centers. And the idea is that we provide like evidence-based scientific support and technical support to European policies, which in this case is very crucial because of the research-oriented characteristic of AI. After this brief introduction to the context of my work, I want to explain a little bit which is the European approach for trustworthy AI and how it has been driven from a more ethical considerations to legal requirements, which is the current status. So these are more or less the challenges that the policymakers and they might try to address, which are linked to some characteristics or certain characteristics of AI systems, which can be, for instance, the complexity that they have, the opacity, so the difficulty in understanding the behavior and the reasoning behind the system, the certain unpredictability about the outcomes of certain kind of approaches and models, the autonomous characters that can be also connected to what we call automated system, but is also a characteristics of AI in the sense not only that they can work autonomously in the sense that they don't need interaction of supervision, but also that there is an autonomy in the way they reach decisions, so they decide. And finally, the use of data. So these are from our perspective the main challenges that are found in AI systems, in current state-of-the-art system, that have associated some challenges. And I put this from the policy perspective. For instance, there are risks to safety of those systems, both physical and mental safety. There are risks to fundamental rights, such as discrimination, which is one of the most researched fundamental rights related to AI. There are also challenges related to how to enforce certain legal requirements, as we will discuss later. There's also the risk of societal mistrust that people might not trust the systems that they use, and also, especially in Europe, the risk of regulatory fragmentation in different countries to have different rules. So this has these characteristics and challenges and have motivated the sectorial approach of the Commission, which because they are present in all sectors, from education to healthcare. The European approach to AI was the last package was published in 2021. And it has like two different pillars. On the one hand, there is a need to for any policymaker to, and for any society to enforce the uptake of this. This is what we call the ecosystem of excellence, because we foresee there are many opportunities and also many applications where artificial intelligence can bring added value. This is on the one hand, and this is fostered by promoting, for instance, the skills of people to uptake the technology, to have facilities for computing or from data. And of course, in Europe, this is done in a coordinated way with all member states together. And then on the other hand, there is always the risks that those systems bring, and this is what the Commission calls the ecosystem of trust. So we need to, of course, protect fundamental rights and ensure that the technology is adopted in a trustworthy way. So this is of course, the motivation for the European regulatory proposal that I will detail a little bit later, that was also published in 2021. So there is on the one hand one coordinated plan that fostering excellence, on the other hand there is this regulation or proposal for regulation. All this work that was a conclusion, it was published in 2021, but it started much earlier. Already in 2018, there was the publication of the ethics guidelines for Trustworthy AI. There was the first document, and it was done by 52 experts that they came from industry, from academia, from civil society, and they developed this kind of guidelines that's around the concept of trustworthy AI. So this was a work that was not carried out by the Commission itself, but this high-level expert group with different views, different perspectives. And these are the 7 requirements that were defined to be needed for having trustworthy AI. And of course, this concept of trustworthy has been very much discussed in the literature. So you see there are the 7 requirements, and there are some of them that, I mean, the first one is more, there are some of them that are more technical. For instance, I think about technical robustness, safety. There are some, which is the second requirement I number here, or the third one is more related to data. Then there's 2 requirements, which are one related to transparency and to fairness. So more the idea of communication and transparency, and then the idea of diversity and non-discrimination. Then there is a 6th requirement, which is societal and environmental well-being, which might seem a little bit more difficult to articulate in concrete action. So it's broader in a sense. And then there is the 7th requirement, accountability. So in these ethical guidelines, the high-level expert group developed also an assessment list for these 7 requirements with a set of questions and that were also piloted with different organizations in Europe so that to see how feasible they were, these requirements were. So in terms of actual action. So this was the first effort, of course, and this was very broad. And since then, there has been a piloting, there has been also an assessment of the feasibility of the different requirements until proposing the regulatory proposal. Of course, the AI Act is coming from ethical considerations to really legal requirements. And it's based on the idea that we are not going to address there's no need to address the AI in a general way, but depending on what we call the intended outcomes or the intended purpose, which is the context of application. So this is in line with the idea that we have to think about systems as socio-technical systems. So we also need to consider the context where they are applied. So in this sense, the AI Act defines a set of requirements for AI system according to their intended purpose and by defining 4 levels of risk as you see here in the picture. For instance, we consider that there will be some uses of AI that might be prohibited in Europe. So the requirements are not to deploy in this particular application. There will be then some application domains where AI would be permitted, but subject to the compliance with a set of requirements and also ex-ante conformity assessment. Then there will be many applications that are permitted, but only subject to information and transparency obligations. And finally, also application with minimal or no risk. So the idea is that we will then ask for requirements depending on the risk, and the risks are of course related to the risk to safety and fundamental rights. So just to give you some example, the applications that are depicted as prohibited in the AI Act are over manipulation, for instance, subliminal manipulation resulting in physical and psychological harm, exploitation of vulnerabilities resulting also in physical or psychological harm, social scoring by public authorities, and certain cases of remote biometric identification for law enforcement purposes in publicly accessible spaces with exceptions. So these are very, very particular cases of biometric identification, and I will give you some more concrete examples later. These are, so then in the sense that the regulation is proposing certain uses that might be prohibited by law. So this is of course, the proposal of the Commission that is being now negotiated. In the second risk level, we have high-risk artificial intelligence systems, which are 2 types of systems. On the one hand, they are systems that can be safety components of some products that are already regulated in Europe, such as medical devices or machinery, which might have to adapt their third-party assessment to some requirements specifically of AI. And the second are certain standalone AI systems that are used in very specific scenarios. And you have there the 8 scenarios that the regulation defines. For instance, there are certain uses in education and vocational training, certain uses in employment and workers management, for instance, recruiting people. This is one of the areas where this is considered as high risk, or some cases in the context of migration, asylum, and border control management. So these systems are considered to have a high risk, and then they need to comply with a certain set of requirements. And this is a summary of the requirements that the AI Act asks for. There is the need, for instance, you see on the left, to establish and implement a risk management system, also adapted to the intended purpose of that system. And as I explained, earlier. And then there are like 5 major requirements, which are related on the first one on the use of relevant training, validation, and testing data. And then we consider also representativity, always with a view of the intended purpose. So representativity of the data that is used according to the purpose, the fact that it should represent, for instance, demographics, it should not be biased. So there is the requirement of having high quality data. Then there is the second requirement of documentation and logging. So there is the requirement more related to, we need to document the AI system in a proper way, and also set up some ways for monitoring it and for traceability in case of future, for instance, in accidents or problems. Then the third one is to ensure appropriate degree of transparency and provide, for instance, user information about the capabilities and limitations of the user and how to use it and challenge it. Then ensuring human oversight measures, which also should be related to the intended purpose, where the system will be used, and also more technical robustness, accuracy, and cybersecurity for the system to be trustworthy. Most systems of finally will not be high risk, but there will be what we consider minimal risk or transparency obligation. For instance, some systems that are considered to be in this risk of transparency obligation are the ones that for instance, communicate with people. So there we need to notify humans, like chatbots, for instance, that they are interactive with an AI systems, unless this is evident. So this is a requirement. Or that, for instance, when we do emotional recognition, we need to notify also people that they are subject to this kind of system. So it's just transparency to communicate the use of those systems. And also, for instance, in the case of generative models, we need to inform that, for instance, in the case of deepfakes. And finally, many of the systems are minimal or no risk. So there is voluntary code of conduct in line with also the ethical considerations. So this is more or less the policy context where we are working. Just to conclude on this was a proposal that was published by the Commission. Then in Europe, there is a negotiation process of this proposal, so it can change. And what we call the co-legislators, which are the Council and the European Parliament. And then hopefully the proposal will be then approved and then adopted. So this is still under negotiation. So some details are changing, for instance, about the different specification of systems that are in different risk levels. There are some changes or about the exact definition of AI systems. So just for you to know that this is an evolving initiative that is being adapted. Now I wanted to give you a little bit the idea of which are the challenges that my team is currently addressing, and also in this context of trustworthy AI. And you see that there has been ethical guidelines that now we come to regulation. So we are trying to address the concept of trustworthy AI in practice. So our idea is to provide, of course, scientific evidence to those policies, to the requirements, and to go from trustworthy AI in theory to trustworthy AI in practice. And the main challenge we are addressing, of course, is to go from the legal text, which is very general and also has a vocabulary that is, of course, legal. So there's different, even some considerations. But if you read the AI Act, there has been many technical terms already defined, and they are being defined, but its main challenge to have technical soundness and legal also soundness, to go from this legal text to standards. And this is also AI standardization is also part of our work, and trying to get, but not only standards per se, but also standardized methodologies to ensure all these requirements, and also map it to current engineering practices in software development, and also in AI development and in machine learning development, because there's also many things that we can learn from that. So we have been working into, oh, sorry, I forgot social impact in this 4X scenario with strong social impact. So we wanted to have a wide view and of Trustworthy AI, and this is the 4 areas I will try to be very general because of the lack of time, but I will point you to some papers and publication with more details. And the idea is that, of course, we cannot, and in line with the proposal and regulatory proposal, we're going to see AI systems out of context, and this is usually how we as researchers we work in computational tasks, or we work in maybe some applications, but we are not working in commercial settings or scenario where you really have an application domain. So we were trying to cover a wide range of applications also, and I will explain you a little bit some of the work we have been doing. So one of the areas where we are working are autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles are one of those systems where AI might be considered as safety component. So and autonomous vehicles have a very well-established literature also on testing and also on evaluation that might be also very valuable to learn from other domains and also to adapt to AI. And this is we did a study, very long study. It's like a PhD thesis on trying to analyze all the different components, AI components in an automated vehicles, and trying to reflect on how Trustworthy AI could be applied to the different components. This work was led by David Fernandez Llorca. He's an expert in this area. And we later had a workshop with different researchers from different institutions, and we are trying to advance on this project for a more comprehensive overview. So for instance, we have here localization, dynamics in understanding, path planning, control, user interaction. So there might be many AI systems we need to consider, and we need to apply all these 7 requirements, for instance, from privacy to human agency and oversight, societal well-being, and transparency. So we did like a state-of-the-art review on all the work, and then we tried to find which were the gaps in terms of research and policy, and also which were the challenges that we needed to address. And for instance, one of the things that of course, this is not new, but one of the things that we had a hard time to address was the idea of different stakeholders. This is also common in other domains like multi-stakeholder evaluation, but the idea of trustworthy autonomous vehicles for whom, no? Because there is a huge complexity of users and stakeholders involved in the development of any system, any AI system, especially in this sense in autonomous vehicles. And then other aspects, we went and in the report, one by one of the 7 requirements for Trustworthy AI, we wanted to see what were the challenges. For instance, in human agency and oversight, we saw the challenge of developing agency-oriented in-vehicle and external human-machine interface. So this is a very complex interaction between the driver and also the pedestrians. We are also show the need for mutual awareness between automated vehicles and users, and the gap of finding ways to reflect on human oversight exercise by external users. So this is an ongoing work that we are doing now in human agency and oversight in this context, and we are running also a behavioral study on this respect. We also address, for instance, transparency as one of the aspects that are relevant for automated vehicles, the limitations of logging practices, and also how transparency should be adapted to different kind of stakeholders like approval authorities, passengers, external users, and also the scientific community. And we are also working a bit on diversity and discrimination and fairness. For instance, we discovered there are a lot of biased data set for perception system, and we are also the need to annotate data sets, for instance, for the information about type of pedestrian, for instance, gender information, the need to have more meaningful data sets for the evaluation, and also the need not only to consider perception, but also the need to consider that different type of users should have the same safety level. So we are trying to work on this direction, avoiding, for instance, the dilemmatic situation. And just to give you an overview, we of course discovered that there is a readiness levels of the different requirements, where there's a lot of research on certain requirements linked to robustness and safety, which is maybe the very basic thing for an automated driving system. There is not much research more related to societal and environmental well-being, or which is very broad and is also not well understood. So this is the first scenario I wanted to mention. Of course, due to the time constraint, I was very broad, but just to have you give you an overview of that we are trying to address this trustworthy and an holistic view and in real setting, which is really challenging. And then we are, of course, doing more focused studies in certain aspects. The second study I wanted to present is the facial processing. Facial processing and biometrics are one of the more sensitive areas where there has been a lot of public discussion and a lot of course, there is one of the prohibited practices relates to that. And we wanted to establish the landscape of facial processing. We published a paper at Scientific Reports where we tried to review the scientific literature, also company products and real-world applications, and then assess then the risk level, because some people, for instance, may think that, okay, the AI Act is really prohibiting all the biometric, and it was also the perception of many people, and it's very important also for people to have an idea of the impact of the different policies. So we did that. For instance, we review all the computational tasks. They are different. There are 12 computational tasks related to facial processing. This was led by Isabelle Lubon from the HUMAINT team. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. So there were like 12 different computational tasks that we review with input and output. Then we also review the industry landscape. For instance, we confirmed the hypothesis that there are many SMEs, small medium enterprise in this landscape, 60% of them, and also in Europe this is very important, the ecosystem of SMEs. So, and we also review, for instance, the applications according to their risk level. And you have a table with all the applications. I think there were 60 use cases and applications that we identify, and then you have here the different colors. Green is no risk, then red is high risk, and then the black is prohibited, but in certain circumstances. And for instance, you see that there are many of them. These are biometric identification applications that are low risk or no risk. There's some of them, of course, that are very specific, which might be prohibited, like unconstrained face identification. And this there you see the computational tasks and the areas where they are applied. Like, for instance, LA is law enforcement. So this is one of the examples of the AI Act. And then we see, for instance, that there's some biometric characterization that are low or transparency. For instance, you need to inform people if you are detecting personal attributes, so only subject to transparency obligations. And then we also, of course, I think, identify some application links to safety components of, for instance, driving monitoring and warning in cars. So this is a safety component of a system. And many applications with social good, and they were mostly driven also by small SMEs and innovators. So, for instance, visual live logging as memory aid, or speech recognition for voice impaired.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
So this was this review gave us also a view of which are the challenges that Trustworthy AI is facing facial processing. For instance, we saw that transparency is crucial because it's are not well documented. This causes a lot of disinformation also for the audience, for outreach, and also for scientists. A big component of fairness was data. Data data sets are demographically imbalanced, and there is also an imbalance between, for instance, big tech and SMEs, in the sense that they use different sizes of database, and also small medium companies are limited by research only licenses. So this was also our observation. We also observed challenges in privacy and security, given that software architectures tend to be now increasingly distributed. So we need more research for federated learning, visual cryptography, or data minimization. And finally, of course, we saw the need for evaluation benchmarks, which go a little bit beyond accuracy, and they consider all these context and operational settings. So going from computational tasks to real systems and use cases. So we are also working now on a way to describe the use cases using UML and adapting it to our particular context. The third domain where we have worked a lot in our team is children. Why? Because, of course, children are a vulnerable population, and also because most of the systems are deployed or designed having an adult in mind, but they are widely used by children nowadays. And this is a work led by Vicky Carisi, also from the HUMAINT team, and we were trying to have these three triangle. We want to first carry out some studies with children to understand about how they behave, what is the impact on their cognitive and socio-emotional development, because with kids we can really see the change in a short term. We also mapped opportunities and risks and challenges, as we have been doing for the other two applications and projects I explained. And then we also contributed to the design and evaluation of systems. We did that with social robots. This is the main focus of Vicky Carisi, recommender system, which is also my main area of expertise. And we have a PhD student working on conversational agents and children. And this was centered about this report where we look at also rights of the children. So we want to put also children rights because there is a policy need. For instance, in the AI Act, there's a special mention to children and vulnerable population. So one example of these are the kind of studies that we have carried out with children. Of course, they are small scale, but the second study was with 84 children, which was a major study for us. We did a study with social robots, and we see, for instance, how the robot can impact cognitive processes in a given task, in a problem-solving task. And in the second study, we look at the social interaction between children and the impact of the robot in this interaction. And finally, we also publish a paper about how they perceive trust and on robots. And those studies gives us a lot of insights on how to develop a system. For instance, we give a series of recommendations on how to communicate about the system, how to not impose the interaction, but leave the children their initiative in initiating the interaction, etc. This is another example of another study we did on the mapping of opportunities risk, this linked to recommender systems, for instance, and there is a community that is KidRec, and that is very active on that, and we try to map, for instance, the many opportunities that recommender system may have, bringing value and supporting children's autonomy, assessing material, or interacting with peers, but also some of the risks that they have, like overexposure to content, addictions or dependency, and also the difficulty for parents to monitor children's behavior. So from this mapping and our studies, we had then an understanding on the challenges that we need to address. And third, we also contributed to the design and evaluation. This is the work by Marina Escobar, who is one of our PhD students, where we look at conversational agents, and then we try to do some mapping of the 7 requirements for Trustworthy AI and drive some recommendations, for instance, to design those systems, for instance, in terms of AI awareness, like informing about the system, providing age-appropriate behavior of the system, for instance, according to the age and the social context. Also, thinking about risk management in terms of data and maybe attacks or personal data collection, and involving children in all the design, the design process. So this is a little bit the work we do in children, where we try, as I say, to cover, on the one hand, the practical design of system, and on the other one, the understanding of children behavior. And of course, in this project, we also collaborated with a team of researchers from other institutions, and we wrote this report that I showed earlier on AI at children's rights, and engaging also with other organizations to have more global and more general conclusions. And the last system that and project I wanted to mention is it's about music. And of course, we have been in HUMAINT, we have collaborated with the music technology group at Fairfax universities, and where I am also associated, and we had a couple of students working in the idea of trustworthy AI and music, because of course, as music is always considered by policymakers as a low a risk application, and also by people because they feel, okay, music is something that does not have an impact, but indeed it has a lot of impact into culture, emotions, and also is linked to creativity. So there is a lot of concern also in the music community to evaluate those systems in a trustworthy way. And in fact, we are I am co-authoring a tutorial on trustworthy music information retrieval at the next ISMIR conference in India that is happening next week. So here we have addressed several of the same topics that I have presented in other domains. For instance, we have worked in the concept of diversity. This is the work of one of our postdocs now, Lorenzo Porcaro, and Carlos Castillo, on trying to have a holistic design of a recommender system for music, considering diversity. So this is a work that we have been doing in the last years, trying to get diversity into the recommendation and understanding the impact on listeners of recommendation diversity. And we have run several studies on this area. We have also addressed very practical aspect, which is gender bias and fairness in music platforms, gathering data from Last.fm platform, for instance. This was one of the studies that we carried out, and analyzing first gender in data, then in algorithms, and then the difference and the way that algorithms may propagate or reinforce existing biases. So this is one example of the application of fairness and bias methods to the music domain. We also have been interested a lot in music and audio into generative models and transparency, because of course machine learning techniques are now being deployed in the music production domain, from the creation to the distribution. And there are many concerns and many issues that we need to address and research. For instance, the impact on intellectual property, and also which are the engineering practices that we should follow to document and to also be transparent in the way that we use machine learning in this domain. And for instance, there is a huge impact and discussion about transparency into listeners, how they will know the level of involvement of technology in the music they listen to. Also, the idea of conversion of voices, and also impersonation of people, and also towards creators. There is a lot of discussion about how this will impact their jobs, and also their working, the way of working. So this is some ongoing work also that we are doing in this domain. So just as a conclusion, I think I have a little bit more time. So in all this project, the conclusion we are having, of course, that if we want to address this in a holistic way, of course, there is a very broad, and there are different kind of readiness level, as we call it. We can say technology readiness level. We call it like requirements readiness level. There's some of them that are much grounded in the literature, for instance, technical robustness and safety, which has been there already standard, for instance, for cybersecurity. There a huge amount of literature. And accuracy, of course, there has been the main criteria for evaluation of AI. So there's a ground literature to build upon. There are others that, of course, there's some research, but there are still many gaps. For instance, privacy and data governance, human agency and oversight, transparency and diversity, non-discrimination and fairness. As an example, fairness is a very active topic of research, but there is still much to research and to work on in this direction. And then there is maybe some aspects that we consider as newly addressed, like the societal and environmental impact, or well-being, the concept of well-being, and the concept also of risks and systemic risks, and then accountability. So these are, of course, the conclusions that there's a lot of work to do, and then we will continue doing that. So this is a little bit what I wanted to present to you. And finally, of course, this is an ongoing effort that the work of our team started, of course, in more research perspective, but of course with the uptake of some regulatory approaches, we are becoming also more involved into this work. And I wanted to just to mention that the Commission recently announced the opening of a new center, European Center for Algorithmic Transparency, that will provide technical assistance and practical guidance for transparent and trustworthy algorithmic systems. I didn't mention because of the limitations of time, but there is also another regulation, which is the Digital Services Act, which has also a focus more on platforms and search engines, not on AI system per se, but it has also some synergies in the sense that it also has some requirements, for instance, on transparency. So this center will provide more a holistic technical assistance and guidance, combining methodologies from different disciplines and also engaging with the international community of researchers and practitioners across different disciplines and also different backgrounds. So just to finalize with the fact that, of course, we are now building the team. So if anyone is interested, you can contact me or also check the website for more information. I think more or less I was, I think 1 minute earlier. So I wanted to just thanks again for the invitation. It was very nice to be here, and I hope you found this seminar interesting, because online seminars, you don't see people's faces, so it's difficult to know. So I'm happy to take questions, the comments and discussion now if you want. So thanks a lot for your time. And you can find also on our website all the publications. We are now moving to the new website at the center, but for the moment you can find this in the old one, and also using this hashtag in Twitter. But mostly in the webpage you'll find all the publications, and you can also ask me if there is any question.
Thank
so
you,
that's
Emilia.
it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. It was a great talk, and plenty of questions from myself, but I think there are already some in the chat. So I don't know if people want to ask themselves this question. Chandra, you are first.
Sure. You had a lot of nice prohibitions and requirements at the beginning of the talk. They don't make much sense if you can't enforce them, right? So what's the plan to enforce them?
Yes, thanks a lot for the question. Very interesting. And this is one of the main discussions. Of course, you think they are a lot, but I think they are kind of tailored to the risk. But yeah, the regulation is is according to the product. So you have to do an assessment before the product is put into the market. So there is I mean, it's the same idea, for instance, for toys. If you want to have a toy in Europe, you have to get some requirements of safety, that it doesn't have small pieces, and so it's the same idea. You have to assess them before the product is put into the market, and then the regulation asks people to also register them on a database and also to do a monitoring and follow up. So it's Of course, the enforcement is very important, and but the idea is to follow the current rules for products. So there is no news on that. And of course, there is, as I mentioned, the legal text is very broad, so then you need standards. And there is, of course, you may be aware that there are many standardization initiatives on this field. So I guess there will be also harmonized standards that will apply to the requirements.
So to follow up with that question, I think I will put one is mine. So Chanda also asked what happens if someone violates that. I'm not sure there's already settled, but for example, for product it's clear, but there are things that are like advertising. And if you take, for example, you mentioned subliminal techniques like Article 5. What happens if you do advertising that is subliminal to people that have health issues? How you can enforce that?
Yeah, in this kind of regulation, I didn't have time because, you know, I'm also not a lawyer. So, but there's also, you know, in this, there is the two sides. One, you have to make a series of assessment before you put the product in the market, and then if there is an accident, or you can also claim, and there is the liability, civil liability. So this is somehow complementary, but I guess you refer to the prohibited practices, right, Ricardo? These are, I didn't have time to, because in the legal test, they are, the problem is that they are very general, and now they are being refined to the kind of prohibited practices. Of course, I will not consider advertising and one of the prohibited practices of the AI Act.
Yeah, great. Ken, you are next.
So, I mean, my question is kind of similar, but I'm worried about jurisdictions. So in Europe, they don't do this, that, and the other thing because they don't, but we have different standards here, and we do all those things. And then on top of that, the bad guys will probably do whatever they want to do. And what are we going to do about that? So I'm worried that the actual risk to community, to the world, is what happens when bad guys do what they do, or people do things in other jurisdictions. And so, you know, you can write whatever rules you want for your jurisdiction, but I don't see how to make it work worldwide.
Yeah, this is a very interesting point, Kenneth. I don't have the answer. You know, I'm a researcher. I'm a researcher, but yeah, it's very difficult to have common values for different countries. I mean, I don't know if there is also the UNESCO ethical guidance for AI. You should have a look, and it's very complicated to arrive to a consensus because people have different values, and so yeah, that's a big deal. But I agree. And this is also a lot of discussion between the challenge, the balance between privacy and security, and also law enforcement agencies, no? That they want to have security, and then they have restrictions. So it's a very good point, but I'm sorry I cannot reply to this. But yeah,
We need to invite a lawyer for next year's seminar. So Misha, you're next.
Okay, thank you for a very nice presentation, and addressing a lot of those issues that that face us. But one thing that struck me is that having unbiased training sets do not necessarily assure ethical fairness, and especially because a lot of the AI systems are relatively fragile to respect to context, and I'm interested in areas where, like medical area, where we have to apply it to individuals, and individuals are definitely not going to be represented fairly in the data set. So I was wondering if you're thinking about these kind of issues.
Yeah, I think fairness is a fairly complex issue, and Ricardo knows very well. There is all the components that you can have there, different viewpoints from the data to the algorithm to the human. So I guess my impression is that it's context dependent, as you say, and it really depends on where you're going to apply the system. And I mean, there's no such a thing. Of course, we want our computational models to work for more or less, you know, all populations. So when we have a training data set, we want to have it in the data. But later, if you are going to use this in a particular context, you may want your system to be biased. So I think it's very important to consider the use case. And now we are more, my team is more moving into use case mode, into UML kind of thing. Like, okay, I have this context, and then what is fairness for me and in which context? So this is the problem of generalizing, and that's why I think the approach of intended purpose is good. But of course, you can do this in medicine, but then if you deploy your system in another country, you may need to change the data that you use. So that's my feeling.
Well, I was wondering, you know, one of the things that I didn't hear enough about is actually detecting subtle biases. And I wonder if there is effort in this direction that is significant.
I'm sure there is.
Detecting situations where actually it doesn't work, right?
Mm.
We do have some seminars that address the bias issue, so I can point them to you later. So that's
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, and also to say that sometimes you might want to have bias. I don't know, imagine you have a system for women in, you know, in this, you want to be biased to women. So that's also depending on the context. Yeah.
Yeah, bias is not always negative.
Yeah.
So, Joe, do you want to ask your question? I think it's a very interesting question because it's the same issue of the data protection regulation in Europe, GDPR, where basically one shoe size fits all. Joe?
Actually, I thank you, but I think Silvio's question is even better. So would you go to him and then come back to me if there's time?
Sure, Silvio.
Hi, yeah, I appreciate. I just raised my hand because my question is very related to what Misha was talking about, and it's essentially, I mean, this tension that we have, and you know, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on how should we kind of resolve this conundrum between the risks and the ethical issues of inferring individual demographic attributes, which can be problematic. I mean, for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons, for example, being that even such models to infer these demographics may have different levels of performance for different groups. And so how do we kind of square the need to have systems that adapt to different groups or that stratify results of population level analysis? And how do we kind of square this with the risks of inferring these types of attributes? I guess the easy way out is to ask people for these data, but that may not always be practical or feasible.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a good question. We have been discussing this a lot in the context of a project we have, which is called Living AI. We want to have some indicators of diversity, and then we were trying to, of course, address gender labeling, and there was also a paper at INFAT conference last year about the demographic monitoring, and then the risk also of labeling, and then they were claiming for consent, but of course you cannot have consent. And the problem is that many of those systems, for instance, recommender system, they don't really have this data because they apply data minimization, so they will never store this data. For instance, gender, and then they will not be able to evaluate if there is bias in their system. So that's very problematic because even if you don't log it, you are using it indirectly because it might be related to other attributes that you may have. So I think we need to find there's always a balance that we need to find. Also the risk but it's if we really want to monitor, my feeling, if we really want to evaluate and monitor, we may need some sensitive categorization. For instance, imagine you want to see if your system is gender biased. You need to have gender attributes. But of course, there's a lot of troubles in gender tagging because the categories are not clear. There's also a lot of criticisms about tagging gender. So there's always the backside. But my feeling is that we need to consider the situation and see what is the added benefit of having this data. And this is, again, risk-based approach. You need to balance a little bit the risk and the benefit. But I think it's the big discussion that we are having at the moment. For instance, with GDPR, there is not, you have to minimize the data that you gather. And of course, now, if you need to evaluate accuracy for different races or different national origins, you may need this data. So for the purpose of bias monitoring, then it should be used. So this is, I think, the key question. But I, again, don't have the answer. But my feeling is that sometimes we might need this kind of data.
Yeah, just for bias monitoring and also mitigation if
of course,
needed,
of course,
right?
Yeah,
So,
of course, yeah.
Yeah, the issue is that I feel, at least looking at how what kind of techniques we can use to try to mitigate bias. I mean, they assume that you have this this information, and the issue is that oftentimes different groups are represented, some groups are underrepresented in the data sets that we have to begin with. And so this poses all sorts of challenges, both for measuring bias and trying to mitigate bias. Yeah. And I have encountered those limitations in my own research.
Yeah. And also, I guess you will not have to have all the data that you will have in deployment. Maybe you can have a more controlled scenario or sandbox where you could have this kind of data. But as you say, if there is no data from this, we had a project on law enforcement, and maybe for some in Spain and for some communities, you don't have the data. But only by reflecting on this, I mean, you are doing that in your research, but most product developers, they don't reflect on that. So I guess only by reflecting on those kind of issues, I think you might end up like gathering some data for this monitoring and mitigation.
If without monopolizing the time, if I can just ask a follow-up question, which is okay, suppose we have this data, what kind of invariances should our bias mitigation techniques kind of ensure? Because as you said, for example, if we're looking at the medical domain, gender and race and ethnicity may be valid clinical predictors, but on the other hand, they can also expose these systems to these biases. So is there any good way to think about what kinds of invariances should our systems kind of employ, and what's a good way to think about those? Or is it domain specific?
My feeling is that it's domain specific, but it's, for instance, might be linked to high level concepts such as safety. For instance, you need to ensure the same safety level for different groups, if we think, but not about the same recognition rate of the, so we need to evaluate with the person in the center. Or for instance, in automated driving, we think about safety, no? As we want to ensure the same level of safety for men and for women. But of course, as you say, every individual is different. So we can also have individual fairness and not considering groups. So there's many ways to look at this. But I feel it's domain specific. It depends on the application and the context.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Emilia. We can keep discussing because I have only 5 questions, and these are the main ones for me. But because we write a blog post about your seminar, we'll send you then some questions that were not addressed, and I think it would be very nice to get your opinion on those for the record. So thank you again for coming. And,
Yeah,
and
thanks a lot.
I invite all of you to our next seminar next Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.